Thank you, Fran. We'll limit our questions till after the panel's done, and I'm going to just move right on, and because we're just going to go in order. Cheryl, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the panel, and we'll try to keep it about 5 minutes if we can. That way we can get to questions, too.
Very good. Thank you, Chairman Frazier and members of the committee and staff. It's an honor to be here representing the Southern California Association of Governments. I am Cheryl Villegas Walker, president of SCAG. I am also a member of the El Centro City Council, elected to my first term in 1997. Some of you are very familiar with SCAG. Some of you may not be as familiar. We are the largest MPO in the nation, representing 191 cities, 6 counties, approximately 18 million people. We are the nation's global gateway. SCAG region alone represents the world's 16th largest economy. Earlier this month, SCAG had the opportunity to host our 6th annual Economic Summit in Los Angeles, which takes a look at where Southern California is economically and seeks to find collaborative strategies and solutions to achieve our economic turnaround and create jobs which are much needed throughout all industry sectors in Southern California. It was my privilege to tell a story to the 400 people sitting in Los Angeles that the broccoli that they were eating that day for lunch came from the Imperial County, where I'm from. And it was picked. It was harvested 2 days prior to that. I tell this story because it's very illustrative of the challenges we are facing. I come from a county with a 20% unemployment rate. A 20% unemployment rate.
And that's good.
Okay, so it is an improvement, as Fran is reminding me. But I tell that story just to remind everyone and to focus on how important goods movement is. If you think about how you spent your day, how you spent yesterday, how much of that actually came from your own backyard? No, we need this interconnectivity. We need to be able to move our goods through the state of California and through this country in an effective and efficient manner. Going back to our economic summit, we did learn that within the last 10 years, we have brought back about 1 million of those jobs lost during the Great Recession. But what's the qualifier there? Those 1 million jobs are low-paying jobs and not the kind that we need, and not the kind that we know will come about once we get our transportation funding in place. It's very important to know that the economic benefits, the economic upside, will come by creating jobs where you do not require a college degree. Only 29% of the folks in Southern California have a bachelor's degree. We need these good-paying jobs that don't require a 4-year education so folks can support their families. 1/3 of our economy in Southern California is supported by goods movement dependent industries, including 2.9 million jobs, $291 billion in GRP in 2014, $405 billion in cargo in Southern California ports, $92 billion of international air cargo in Southern California in 2014. 40% of our nation's incoming waterborne freight comes in and out of Southern California, supplying goods throughout this country. Additionally, Southern California's infrastructure must also accommodate a tremendous influx of goods over our international border, where I call home. We have 6 international borders with Mexico, including the land port in Calexico, where some of you may be aware we brought in over $14 billion worth of trade in 2014. These facts underscore the interconnectivity, the reality of Southern California that support infrastructure and environment. The good news is we have a plan. SCAG released its 2016 Regional Transportation Plan, SCS. It's currently out for public comment. And I will assure every member of this committee that you would not find a more inclusive, dramatic plan anywhere. We have never seen that level of outreach to reach every single stakeholder, every single county represented by SCAG, to get their input into a comprehensive, well-defined plan. Now all we need is the funding to make it all happen, and that's where we look to you. Whether it's this legislation, other legislation, whether it comes from the federal government or from the governor's proposal, we cannot continue to lose our competitiveness. We also need the funding to put a excellent plan in place, and that's where we look to you. We also know that the Prop 1B bond funds, we felt that that program was very successfully leveraged. We hope we can do it again. Chairman Frazier, I want to thank you for this legislation. I want to thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you for doing what you said you would do, which was to visit throughout the state. And when you came to Coachella Valley and heard from us in the Coachella Valley and the Imperial Valley, I can't tell you what that meant to find someone here that was willing to stand up for what they believed in and went out and got the research done to come up with this comprehensive legislation that we think will work wonders and make a dramatic impact on all of California. With that said, I will stop. Thank the committee again for allowing us this time. I'm going to be very happy to defer any questions you have to Hassan.
With that, Hassan, would you please join us?
Thank you, Madam President. Chairman Frazier, committee members, thank you. Good to be with you again. We're going to be frank in the discussion because this is about the future of California. This is about how do we give the next generation of Californians the same that we got. It is how we invest in California. You heard a lot today about how important goods movement is, that 1/3 of the state's economy depends on goods movement, and that is very true. You didn't hear much so far about how we're going to build infrastructure to meet the increased demand in California. I probably will not be popular by saying this, but frankly, if we do not build the infrastructure to deal with doubling of the truck volume, with doubling of the train movement, the grade crossings that Commissioner Fran Inman mentioned, we're not going to go anywhere. I said that this committee before, we could have the best environment in California by kicking the 35 million out and say we have a clean environment. But that's not what we want. We want a clean environment, good economy, and I'm a firm believer that we could move both in a balanced approach. And I'm going to build in what our president just said. We have done the work, developed a regional transportation plan for half of the state of California. And I will challenge anybody from the stakeholder, business, and government to come and say that plan is not inclusive, that plan does not take care of the environment, that plan does not care of the economy. Assemblyman O'Donnell talked about the ports, doing a clean program. To your point, Chairman, it's a value program. I don't think any regulation could do as good as that program did. That doesn't mean we don't have to regulate, and absolutely we need to have a great environment. But we need a good economy, and I believe with your leadership we can move both. Here are 3 things I'm going to keep for you to think about, and I'll be happy to discuss in questions and answers. And our president alluded to them. Environment, pay attention to it. We have to meet the requirements. And I want to remind all of you that half the state of California showed the federal government that we are meeting the Clean Air Act requirement. We also are meeting the Air Resources Board targets that they set for sustainable community strategies. So we are meeting the environmental goals. We can meet the economic goals of creating jobs, good paying jobs, and we can move that in a balanced approach. Number 2, I would hope that we do not reinvent the wheels. We have programs that worked well in California. 1B, TCIF, the $2 billion state money leveraged over $10 billion of money around. The railroads partners with the public sector in California did Colton crossings before time, under budget. That's an example of how partnership could go very far. So let's not reinvent the wheel. Let us move in a balanced approach. And let us remember that when we talk about funding, it is needed to move us forward. It is not just something for you. I'm sure none of you have a desire to just add a tax or add a fee. But we all have a desire to preserve for future generations of Californians what we have. The ports throughout all the state of California are very important to the economy. And I urge you, and I thank you for your leadership, I urge you to continue pushing. This is the first time in the history of National Transportation Bill we have dedicated money for goods movement. Let us show the federal government how we can leverage their $10.5 billion over 5 years with California's money and local money and make this an example of how things should be done. Thank you very much for having us today. I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gallegos?
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, since I'm clean up here, I'm going to try to not repeat, and I'm actually going to veer from the presentation I had put together. We'll leave that for the committee. But I wanted to maybe start by building on some of the comments that have made here. And first of all, thank the committee for this opportunity, this informational hearing to come before you. Thank you for AB 1591. I was bullish on the state at around summertime and pessimistic about the federal government. Man, was I wrong. So I'm counting on you guys to prove me right in the end, that we ought to still be bullish on the state of California. But I think in terms of moving over to build on some of the points that have been made here is the challenge of developing a sustainable freight plan is a real one, but how do we do that in a way that we just don't layer ourselves to death? So it's one layer on top of the other layer on top of the other layer. And right now, we get rules from CTC in terms of how we put a plan together. We get rules from CARB in terms of how we put a plan together. We get rules from the federal government in terms of how we put a plan together. We go to our voters to get 2 out of every 3 voters to say we're willing to pay for this stuff. And so I would argue that at the regional level, we've got a lot of the intersections of all these things that are happening. And the key is, how do we partner with the state and the state agencies that are here? Because, look, I don't think the state is ever going to solve all our problems. I don't think we're going to get them solved by the feds. But how do we leverage this dollar with that dollar to accomplish hopefully a bigger thing for the state of California? And the one thing that I see missing, and to build on a point that Hassan made, is that while we ought to not lose an eye on the issue of technology and how we may be able to get more efficiency, what I see missing, though, is we still need to have, I think, a discussion about how we build more capacity. And I would just very quickly like to highlight 2 examples from the San Diego region that I had brought and will share with you to leave behind you with a PowerPoint presentation. But our international border, we just talked about how trade represents 1/3 of the state economy. Mexico continues to be California's largest trading partner. We trade $35–40 billion a year with Mexico. Why might Mexico be a good deal? Because when we buy a product from China, about 2% of its U.S. content, 98% of that product is made someplace else, means those jobs were someplace else. When we trade with Mexico, about 40% of the import that we import from Mexico, about 40% of that content is U.S. content. So, creating jobs in Mexico also helps create jobs on the United States, and it's, part of the economics. We've done studies that show that nationally we're losing out on billions of dollars because our border doesn't work better. And so while I, welcome the idea of a pilot project and a fast lane, I don't necessarily think that may be the ultimate solution. We welcome the opportunity to continue to work with the state. We put forward what I would characterize as a bold initiative to build a brand new border crossing that would be tolled, that would use pricing as a way to better manage congestion and better manage the complexity of the border and, the value-added products versus non-value-added products. We believe that project by itself has the potential to reduce emissions by about 50%. And so we think those are real numbers where, as Hassan's saying, we can balance protecting our environment with also enhancing our economy. But I do think we have to have a discussion about the capacity of things. It just can't all be about how do we make the system we have now better. We have to also plan a system for the future of California. Second project I would like to highlight is what we call our North Coast Corridor project. That's literally along the Low-San I-5 corridor. We see that corridor as important because it connects these important land ports with some of the important seaports in the state of California, specifically LA and Long Beach. But we've just gone through a process where we've gone through the Coastal Commission on figuring out how there's a balanced program to protect the environment, to enhance active transportation, but still improve I-5 and still improve the rail corridors so that we can ship more products. And so I'd like to leave you with maybe a couple of recommendations. And one of the things I would suggest, and maybe to the state agencies, when we did SB 375 and we worked through CARB, and I helped champion the idea that we needed a bottoms-up process, so it's not just a tops-down process, so the little mice that are in the treadwheel trying to run as fast as we can tell the state, can we make the target you're going to give me, or is it totally unrealistic? And I think, that was a pretty instructive process for both the local level and an instructive process for the CARB folks, because, if you give us an impossible target, we're just not going to make it. And so I would advocate that, a little bit of a bottoms-up process might be something that we look at before the state marches off and gives us targets that, maybe are too low or maybe are too high. I think we got to build on the existing framework that we got. Got to look for ways to support local decision making. And Mr. Chairman, I want to agree 100% with you is that the state's complicated and one size does not fit all. So even on the international border, what might work in San Diego may be a little different than what works for Chairwoman Villegas Walker in the Imperial Valley. So, taking into account what the local pieces are, consider funding. We're not just going to efficiency our way through this. We are going to need new funds to build the plans that we've all worked on. And then let me close by saying that I am still convinced that we can get to a sustainable peace, but we got to do it through design. And so thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions of the panel by any of the committee members? Seeing none, I just have one question. When the process starts, and you being the local who has the best handle on your situations, have you ever been able just to talk to any of the interested parties as far as, say, like CARB, that we think that this would be a better value and we would like to make this approach or investment? Have you been able to have that dialogue or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, if maybe I can start. I actually had that opportunity last week in a unique way, because my chairman of the board, Supervisor Ron Roberts, is also a member of the California Air Resources Board. And so I get a call from my chairman yesterday or last week about an idea that he thought, Sandag was talking about, and he said, I hadn't heard that. Where are we at, Gary, on this? And so, that's why we come here today. We look forward to working with the state, but I think it's through some of those connections with policymakers that work on both sides, because I applaud that the state's looking at the border and a potential fast lane as a pilot project. But I think that at least my chairman, that also sits on both boards, thinks that there may be better alternatives, and we look forward to that open dialogue to hopefully figure out what's best for our border and what's best for California.
Fantastic.
Just to add, Chairman, I think we constantly try to talk to the state agency, the Air Resources Board specifically. We're working very closely. When we develop the regional transportation plan, we definitely are coordinating, and some of the staff that we work with are here. Here is what I think Gary said, something that's important. When we started the implementation of SB 375, which is the Sustainable Community Strategy piece, we worked very closely with the RB to have a bottom-up approach, so the regions have a say in how much, how far, and what's the value. And I would hope that anything we do on freight will follow the same process. That is just somebody is going to sit here and says, here you go. Because like Gary said, you could give us a target and there is no way to meet it. Absolutely. And we're back to square one. So I would hope that we have many dialogues. I hope that would continue. And President Walker said something. Your visits to the regions, you probably learn. We appreciate it very much. But remember, at the end of the day, this is going to be implemented at the local level. And I encourage the state agencies to continue the dialogue that they're having with the regions.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one thing. There's no downside to transportation funding, and it touches so many other areas. To borrow a line, I see Mexico from my backyard. A 2-hour wait, a 2-hour wait to cross the border with all of those trucks and traffic idling. We already have one of the highest asthma rates in the state of California for the readmission of children into our hospitals. Air quality is a huge issue. We became a non-attainment area. Federal government was ready to stop any and all economic opportunities in our county. How do you do that where we have 1 in 4 children living in poverty or with an unemployment rate of 20%? It's simply not the right thing to do. And so we are looking to you. We think we've got some really great ideas. And a lot of them have to do with just simple technology things maybe or other things that are going to involve the federal government when it comes to custom and border patrol and inspections and all of that. But I've also sat through plenty of discussions where we simply are not being very intelligent about how we are loading and unloading our trucks. And so I think there's a lot of room for efficiency improvement as well.
And I agree with you. And Mr. Gallegos is supposed to get me in one of those trucks from a Mexican facility, and so I can sit at the border and time it.
If he can't, I can.
Okay.
So.
Kristen, I think you said you had something to say.
Yes, if I could, Mr. Chair. Just by a way of example, when we were mandated at the Port of Hueneme to build our shoreside power projects, it was quite a heavy lift for us because we had about $4 million in the bank and it was a $14 million project. And the way the funds through Prop 1B were going to come at us was through a lump sum grant, meaning we couldn't get reimbursed until after we built the project, which was going to be very challenging for us. So we did have the good fortune to work with the governor's office, work with the ARB and the regulators to change those guidelines so that it could be a reimbursement grant. But that was after the fact and after the regulation, and it became quite a process. So anything that we can do to speak to your point about one-to-one case, not the one-size-fit-alls, and getting those conversations happening well in advance of the regulation so we have viable ways to move forward on projects is going to be very helpful.
Thank you very much. Fran, we'll let you finish up.
I just want to add that we're all part of a very dynamic system of systems, and I don't think that we've really talked about the changes that we're seeing in freight today with the larger vessels and the cargo alliances. We're seeing game changers right before our eyes. We saw the first Triple-E class vessel call on our California ports, and we think that's really cool because those are the newer, cleaner vessels. But when you get these cargo surges, the rest of us need to hustle to make that all work out for all of us. So I think, when we talked about having a final plan in June, July, I'm going to argue that we're never going to be finished with this, and we're always going to have to. So I just want to thank you all, and Chairman, thank you for your leadership on this and all the gazillion site trips you've made. And I'd offer to any of your colleagues that seeing is believing. I think if you get out there, and I can make sure that all of the different partners will be happy to share what we've learned along this journey. But I think we will have to continuously have improvement and focus on these efforts. Thank you.